I came to this town to understand an almost forgotten history, the history of the old Oyo Empire. Not the new Oyo we know today, but the one almost buried under the savanna forest of Oyo. Little or nothing is being said about the largest West African empire to exist in present-day Yoruba land, and also the most important and authoritative of all the early Yoruba principalities. My little research has brought me here with too many questions to ask, like how did the empire start? How great was the empire? The fall and the aftermath. How did the new Oyo come to be? I decided to visit a custodian of history in order to get my facts. Here I learned first about the mythical origin of the empire. But can history prove this mythical theory?
Bí Oòduà ṣe wá àti Mythical ti wá, ìran kan náà ni wá, àwa Yorùbá àti Haúsá ni àti Fúlàní ni àti Ìjẹ̀bú ni àti Ẹ̀gbá ni, ìran kan náà ni a lápapọ̀. Oòduà ló ti Mythical wá. Nígbà tó Oòduà wá dé, ó dé sí Ilé-Ifẹ̀. Tó lẹ́yìn eléyìí ó wá bí àwọn ọmọ.
I also spoke to Tuneleye, an author, who shared with me a different theory.
How did the Oyo Empire start? That's a very tough question, and there's quite a bit of speculation. So the more circulated story is the mythical one, but there would usually also be the more historical one. And many times you find some elements of the historical in the mythical. What's the mythical? The mythical is that Oduduwa came from the east, or if you listen to some other people, he came down a chain, obviously, and landed in Ife, any which way. Founded Ile-Ife, had 7 children. The youngest of the children then went away because he didn't get any of the land. He sojourned and sowed his wild oats in Benin and started the Benin line of kings. And then he came back and founded, Oyo. That's the mythical version. But what a lot of the archaeology, a lot of the, artifacts, cultural artifacts suggest is that a migration happened from the east, correctly, but that east was more of the Niger basin. So a migration happened from there, and there were stops, as is typical. That migration happened in waves, and that's where you find some of the linguistics are related. How Yoruba towns start is a very, very good way to understand how a city like Oyo would have started, or other cities that emerged from the migrations from Ife. So it would have been somebody from the royal line that had a big farm that would have then gone to set up, and that person would have been called Oromio.
Ọ̀rànyàn gangan ni. Àwọn tí ò yé ṣe bàbá wọn ni ń pè l'Ọ̀rànmíyàn gbà bó ti wo kálukú lè pe bàbá. Ọ̀rànyàn ni bàbá Aláàfin, l'Aláàfin àkọ́kọ́.
Like I would say, myths would usually have an element of the reality in it to explain portions of it. So did an Oromio historically settle in a place that was Oyo? That's, I believe, very strongly, and most of the facts indicate it. There was a historical Oromio that was at some time in Ile-Ife, that was at some time in Benin, and that was in Oyo. For all those 3 cities to agree about his person and the things he did, it means that he was around, and he was a great, great, great man when he was around. And did he settle those places? Absolutely. Did he settle because they said Oyo?
Tó bá wá yá, Ifá bá ní kókó nù lù. Ifá ní kò ní sínà ibi tí ó gbé dúró ẹ̀sìn ni ó fún lálẹ́ ẹ̀sìn ni ó ṣàlàyé fún tẹ̀sìn bá ti yọ̀ báyìí tó bẹ́ẹ̀ kúnlẹ̀ tẹ̀sìn ọ̀lọ́mọ́ tó ṣe kẹ́sìn ọlọ́ tẹ̀sìn ọ̀lọ́mọ́ ibi tí ó gbé ṣe ibùgbé nù níbi Ọ̀yọ́ ti bẹ̀rẹ̀ ní wọ́n fi ń pè ní Ọ̀yọ́ ẹ̀sìn lọ́yọ̀ ẹ̀sìn nílẹ̀ yọ̀.
To understand how great the empire was, we must also understand how the Yorubas settled in Oyo, the seat of power, and the advantages of its location. Searching for evidence of the first settlement has taken us miles into the dry savanna, through rocks and close to the Niger River than any other known Yoruba land.
When Oromia came initially, he first settled here at Agbaku. You know, as a warrior, everybody were looking for safety. So people started joining him as a warrior. When people now, they discover the population is getting higher, they now move out, move in, go and build their palace and set up their network. Among the security network they set up then was using of a Mejiro god to secure the empire, and they set up their army using Are Onakakanfu as chief of army staff. The house of Are Onakakanfu is outside the empire, so that you will have access to monitor the security of the empire.
This settlement surely gave birth to the empire, with less than 50,000 people spreading across a vast land. Life during this time was quite different, and they had their own technology to help them survive. Mostly farmers and traders, they had rationed water supply during the dry season, information center for communication, a refuge place for missing people, including a community grinding site.
As you can see, since when we started journey within Oyo Empire, you see that the empire is so wide, to the extent that it's not easy for a town crier to go around, to be going around and disseminate information to the people. They now need to pick a place where people can go and collect information. Only those ones that their information is not clear to them will go to the palace, go and make an inquiry on the information. So this is the place. Then there was no ABC or Arabic writing. They use signals. Part of their signal is what you see on the wall. They come here, they make a mark. To prove it right, not every rock here has that. You can check around. Not every rock has that, except the one they use for it. So this is the Oyo People Information Center, where they receive and disseminate information to the people of the empire. This plant can serve as emergency water supply. You can take water from, you can tap water from this plant and take it pending till the time maybe your relative or your family that go to the reservoir to go and collect water will come back. You just come back from farm, you don't have water. Taste it. You can put your hand, you can perceive the odor of the water, or you taste it and see how it is. Discover that it's odorless and it's tasteless. It's tasteless.
The Oyo Empire flourished from the 17th to the 19th century in what is today southwest Nigeria. History tells us of a settlement that rose to greatness with its outstanding organizational and administrative skills of the Yoruba people.
Gbogbo tí jẹ́lẹ̀ Yorùbá abẹ́ Ọ̀yọ́ ló wà. Kò sí ìlú kan tó lè pòun sí lábẹ́ Ọ̀yọ́. Kẹ́ ẹ lè mọ̀ pé abẹ́ Ọ̀yọ́ ló wà. Ògbómọ̀ṣọ́ tí ní tí wọ́n ń pè l'Ógbómọ̀ṣọ́ lónìí. Aláàfin ló ní ọmọ lọ sọ́hun ni wọ́n fi ń pe ọba abẹ ní sọ́hun. Ẹni tí ń bẹ lọ́hun tẹ́lẹ̀ ọ̀tọ̀ ni. Aláàfin ló ní máa lọ sọ́hun ọ̀tọ̀ lórúkọ rẹ̀ tí ń jẹ́.
wealth from trade and its powerful cavalry, the Oyo Empire was one of the most politically important states in the entirety of Western Africa. Making it an empire so great, it ruled not only over most of the other kingdoms in Yoruba land, but also over nearby African states, notably the Fon Kingdom of Dahomey in the modern Republic of Benin to the west, with its capital once located at Old Oyo, also known as Oyo-Ile.
So you find that the location of Oyo and what it had access to in terms of trade, in terms of horses, and in terms of even interaction with the people across the river, you would find that, for example, they had great interactions with the Nupe, which you would not have, who they called Takpa, which the more southern guys would not have. One of the early Alaafins, Alaafin Shango, his mom was Takpa. Alaafin Onigbogi, history says his mom was Bariba. That was why he could flee into Bariba land when Oyo was sacked for the first time. So they had a lot of that cultural exchange, took things like Egungun tradition from there, had Ifa introduced from across. And of course, that would have also included military technology and all of that. And that gave Oyo a very, very clear advantage over its more southern neighbors, and it could then dominate. So you would find that the system of government in Oyo then was essentially what I would call an imperialization of the regular Yoruba system of government, where you would have a Bale, Otunbale, Osibale, and all that. Many of those chiefs evolved into the Oyomesi. The Oyomesi are essentially the chiefs of the quarters in Oyo-Ile. That's what they are. But because Oyo became imperial, their role became more and more, pronounced than irregular town chiefs.
Táwọn ìbò là wá tí wọ́n gba òkun wá, Èkó ni wọ́n gbà wọ Nàìjíríà. Ìgbà wọn wá dé, tí wọ́n bá wá dé ìlú bí báyìí, tí wọ́n bá ní ta ni ọba yín tọ́jọ́ ọ̀gá yín, wọ́n kọ́ Aláàfin ni. Tí wọ́n bá tún dé ìlú míì, tí wọ́n bá béèrè, wọ́n sì béèrè kálẹ̀ gbogbo ilẹ̀ Yorùbá. Kò sẹ́nìkan tó lè sọ pé Aláàfin ṣe bàbá fáwọn. Tí èdè lọrin.
This ancient settlement soon began to multiply. The empire began to grow in power, wealth, and size. Mostly farmers and traders, but with a more advanced civilization, the empire would rule over other lands as the king systematically planted kingship in other parts of the Yoruba land and even further, with descendants now spread globally. And that is evident today as there are more Yoruba-speaking communities all around the globe, as far as Brazil. With its location, trade routes, and imperial system of ruling, Oyo was only bound for greatness. But why and how did the empire fall?
When Oyo eventually collapsed, one of the key things was that the Fulani Jihad choked its supply of horses, and that significantly affected its ability to muster its cavalry, so that it was then the person who a lot of the cavalry was concentrated in his hand, in the person of Afonja, that had the most military might in the land at the time.
With an imperial system of administration, just like every other nation experiencing any form of evolution, there will always be political division. Or is there more to the fall than we know about today?
When Oyo was founded, it was doing well as a town, but it was not yet at imperial phase, even in the days of Shango and Ajaka and all of that, in both his incarnations as Alaafin. And then when the Nupe were rising across the Niger, and the Nupe are just across the Niger, and they had, Shango's mom was Nupe, so there would have been interactions between them. One of those days, the Alaafin sent out an expedition and the city was left undefended. And Shoede at that time, was very martial and militaristic. And so they crossed the Niger and sacked, the Nupe crossed the Niger and sacked Oyo. Because Oyo, I think the main disadvantage of his location is that once you cross the Niger, there's not a lot between the Niger and the city. You know, it's just a day's march. You'll be in Oyo in those days, and if you had horses, you'll be there in no time. If the city was undefended, then it would be easy to sack.
Ìlú tí ń lù bẹ́ẹ̀ nísìn, gbẹ̀dú tí ń dá bẹ́ẹ̀ níbi tẹ́ ti wò náà ń bẹ ńlọrin. Ilẹ̀ Yorùbá yìí kò sí ńbẹ̀. Gbẹ̀dú Aláàfin Ọ̀yọ́ létí ń gbé nígbà tí Fúlàní lọ jẹ tí ń lọ jagun. Nǹkan Aláàfin wọn lọ kó ní wọn kó lọ bẹ̀ tí ń lọ lò. Tó eyín erin wọ́n gbé lọ. Kàkàkí wọ́n kó lọ. Iná ni wọ́n fi dá sànjọ́ àwọn Yorùbá. Wọ́n ní olè tọ́jà tó gbé kàkàkí bí oní ògbé fún. Nígbà wọ́n fa fèrè lọ́hùn ìmọ̀ pé lọ́rin ni wọ́n ti wá gbé Àfọ̀njá ti wá gbé kàkàkí. Àfọ̀njá ni Ọ̀yọ́ ti mbẹ́mbẹ́. Àmọ́ àlejò gbà máa lọ́wọ́.
By the time Abikpa had moved the capital back to Oyo from Igboho was Alaafin, there was a greater power distance between the Alaafin and his chiefs and the Oyomesi. So the court of the Alaafin moved to Bariba land. 2 Alaafin were there. The second one then moved the court to Oyo Igboho, which 4 Alaafin reigned in before they went back to Oyo, before Abikpa moved them back to Oyo.
War. Nobody wins. The fall of the empire gave birth to new kings, new legends, new stories, and new settlements.
Ibadan was by far the strongest Yoruba city that emerged after the collapse of the Oyo Empire. It was mainly Oyo refugees, but Ibadan used to be an Egba town. It was one of the Egba towns that was destroyed in the destruction of the Egba townships of the forests. It was at the edge of the Egba forest in the south. The people that settled Ibadan were Oyo, Ife, Ijebu, an amalgam of towns led by an Ife chief called Maye. So an Ife was leading Ibadan at the beginning. Then there was like rancor internally until the Oyo complement of Ibadan took leadership, supported by Kunrumi of Ijaye in what I mentioned earlier, the Gbanomo War. That was what the war was called.
Today, the new Oyo stands almost as a replica of the old Oyo, with the palace and the affiliated Akeso market, but without its imperial glory, missing representation of the great years a king once truly ruled all the land.
Oyo that had moved to Agodoyo, was not by any stretch of imagination a strong military power at the time.
Bí àwa yìí gangan ní Jagodoyo. Ní Lagodoyo. Kì í ṣe pé bòmí, Agodoyo la wà yìí. Ní la wà yìí.
Òun ló dá lẹ́yìn tá fi Ọ̀yọ́ ilé lẹ̀.
Bẹ́ẹ̀ ni.
Àníjà àwọn Fúlàní yẹn ló jẹ́ ká fi Ọ̀yọ́ ilé.
La fi lẹ̀. Agodoyo níbi tá wà yìí.
The Alaafin was respected, but it didn't have a lot of say in the military campaigns that were happening at that time. This was cities asserting themselves, new generals emerging, people like Kunrumi of Ijaye, people like Shodeke of Abeokuta, people like Mogumola from Ibadan, all over the place. People like Mojamepo, all those kinds of guys were this new crop of militaristic leaders that emerged to fill the power vacuums that came when Oyo collapsed. And a lot of them were fighting on 2 fronts, fighting amongst themselves, but also fighting to halt the advance of the Ilorin Fulani towards the south. That was ultimately halted by the Ibadans at Oshobo. So it wasn't an attempt by Oyo to recreate itself as an imperial power or reassert itself. In fact, what the Alaafin did at that time was to start using titles, the old imperial titles, to try to win influence amongst so he gave the Kakanfo title to Kurumi of Ijai.
Burnt roofs have come to serve as the trademark of this ancient city, while the true history remains buried in the forest, miles away, forgotten over the years. If only evidence of this great empire can be seen today, it will be easier for us to find our way home.